Afternoon of day one here at Groby in Leicestershire, where we're looking at some of the most fascinating and complex archaeology you can imagine anyone having in their back garden. It spans over 600 years of English history, starting with this little hillock, which is actually the motte of a Norman motte and bailey castle. Now, I'd have imagined that we would put in a couple of little trenches up the top somewhere, but in fact, Phil is now attempting to get right inside it because we believe we've got evidence of a hidden stairway. So what have we got here, Jimmy?
Well, this is the radar data, and we've got the slices here getting gradually deeper into the ground. And so you can see that at the eastern end of the platform, we've got what looks like 3 sides of a tower, but with the north edge missing, going down the slope somewhere.
And where is our staircase, Mick?
That must be somewhere on this side, somewhere down here.
What do you reckon's going on?
Well, it's intriguing because, is it a tower that's on top of the motte, or is it a tower that's within the motte?
You mean they could have put a tower on top of the motte and then stairs going on inside it and built some sort of cellar
or something like that? Or is it a tower that's there already and they've piled the clay around it so the tower sticks out at the top?
Well, if it's the second of those two alternatives, and we know that the motte and bailey's Norman, then presumably the tower would be earlier, possibly even late Saxon. Yeah,
but where Phil's digging there, we should get that wall coming out in relation to the clay of the mound on the outside and any fill inside. So quite which version of that we should understand eventually.
Well, there's still a lot to play for. Well, this certainly raises the game. A tower and staircase buried deep into the ground, but not necessarily Norman. And I thought 600 years of buildings was enough to contend with. But at least Phil's certain how to rise, or should I say descend, to the challenge.
We are desperately keen to get to the bottom of the wall. We must get to the bottom of it. For this trench to have any value at all, we have to get to the bottom of that wall.
Right, everyone clear? We've got to get to the bottom of the wall. That way, we should be able to find out if the tower was here first and the motte was built around it, or if the motte came first, then the tower plonked on top. On most time teams, that would be a big enough challenge to keep us going for 3 days. But we've also got a 15th century manor house and a medieval wall here to get to grips with. And Mick thinks the key to all of that is the bailey, which he believes would have surrounded the motte. I understand what a motte is. It's the hill with the big building on the top. But what's a bailey?
Well, the bailey is the enclosure next to it. There's our motte, look. And these ditches and banks here, I think, are part of the bailey. This building is probably inside it, probably comes up to the road and then back somewhere like that. And it's defined by a bank and ditch around the outside. Inside, we'd have things like the hall, the pantry and buttery, kitchen, barns and stables. We know there was a chapel, all the structures that were supported the people living in the castle. If this structure here is part of the main hall, then that building over there might well be the replacement for that, as it's upgraded in the 15th, 16th century. So one of the things we need to do is to geophys this field in front of us, see where the other walls of this structure are, see if it looks like a hall, pop a trench in and see if we can date it.
So geophys begin to survey the field in front of the motte for any evidence of the buildings Mick would expect to find in a bailey. And crucially, whether this standing wall once formed part of a great hall.
You said it was a bit cleaner because we took a bit...
You cleaned up a bit better than we've done. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, we got a brush pan and dust. And
Well, we'll try and make it a bit cleaner, but it may take us a bit longer.
It's only the middle of day one and we've already got walls in both our trenches. But it's too soon to tell whether they're part of the nunnery.
Phil? Well, it's quite
oh, you got them as well then, Rats, I know. Then this one might be the internal one that we extended the trench for.
These aren't the only clues we've got in the Cold Clough's garden. 4 grave slabs were found around here in the 19th century, and we're cleaning them up to see if they're in their original position or were just moved here to form an ornamental garden feature. Stephen's also wondering whether his Victorian home might contain some evidence. I'll tell you what, Steve, it is a gorgeous house, but cool! Is that the width of a wall?
I think so.
That's some wall, isn't it? That must be older than Victorian, mustn't it?
Certainly think so. I mean, if you look at the walls around all of here, it's certainly much thicker. And we've got a couple of others, I think, in the house that are of similar thickness. So this very large.
So I've called in Henry to identify and plot out any of the thicker walls which look suspicious to see if they line up with anything in the ground.
This very large wall is this one behind us.
That's the one, yep.
Back in the garden, Trench 1 has now revealed loads of walls, but it's proving tricky to untangle them. Phil, is there any structure there, or can I just see rubble?
You can see rubble, but there is structure within the rubble.
Certainly a straight line across there, isn't there?
That's right. I mean, this is a very obvious line going that way, which we think is the wall that John picked up on his geophysics. There's also another nice edge going across there, and you can see there's these stones here. Look how flat they are. It's not as though they're rubble. I think they're actually in a wall.
So we've got walls, but nothing yet to say they're part of the church. But having cleaned up the graves, it seems that they might actually provide an important clue. Fracture, that white stuff down there, is that stone?
That is stone. We initially dug here to see whether these were actually burials in situ and if this was a sarcophagus. And you can see this line, this crack running all the way along.
Yeah.
And it's a bit confusing because we thought that was the lid of the coffin.
Yeah.
But actually digging down, can you see from here to here, that's actually one huge slab of stone. And then this line of stones down here, this might actually be the start of a proper grave. And is this just simply put on top to mark it?
Because one assumption was that this was a collection of stones put here in the 19th century, wasn't it? That had been acquired off the site. Now looks as if there's more structure to it than that.
Presumably this ring of stones round the edge is just a garden feature.
Well, again, I think we assumed that, didn't we? But it's looking quite substantial at the base of it now.
Do you think that we'll end up by lifting these?
I think we might have to see whether they are actually 19th century emplacements or whether they're actually, you know, part of some sort of burial ground, cemetery, whatever.
It's an interesting little puzzle, isn't it?
That's nice. It's pretty. I don't think it's very old by the look of it there. No.
What you got?
Decorated tile.
Oh, look at that. Have you got all of it or just a part of it?
No, all of it.
All of it.
Oh.
Oh, yes.
Paul, can I have a look at this?
What you got? Oh,
There you go.
oh, that's nice. Lovely.
What do you reckon on that then?
It's a bit of medieval decorated floor tile to me. It's got some sort of pattern stamped in it. It appears to be glazed. Have to get it cleaned up for a proper look, but that's come from a nice posh building. I mean, obviously, it's not the sort of thing you'd find in a chicken shed or something, is it?
Medieval tiles and possible in situ graves.
I think these are probably early 14th century.
So how does that tie in with this trench?
That shows us, along with these massive walls, that there's a really big building phase of early 1300s around this rectangular courtyard here.
Yeah.
Is this one of the legendary buttresses?
Yes. And you can see the mason's marks on it as well on the side.
Great, isn't it, that we've got the autograph of one particular worker who was working on this fantastic site.
This is clearly a huge building campaign that produces, from what you're showing us, some sort of really posh aristocratic manor house, not necessarily fully fortified, but like a palace almost.
The Greys are doing really well.
They are,
Absolutely.
yeah.
But after that, it's demolished and they start to build, presumably, that big house over there. And we're just getting glimpses in each of the trenches of what went on before this lot was put up.
So this is the bailey of the Motte and Bailey Castle?
Yeah, where we've got timber slots and bits of pots and odd little trenches. And we're never going to get a complete plan out of it, but at least we can see a much less regular layout of the buildings in this bailey before they come in. And, I mean, this is a mega project.
When the Greys were at the apex of their power. Great result! We now not only know what Groby's buildings looked like, but we can actually chart their history right back to the Norman period. After 1066, Hugh Gromany was given the land and built himself a really substantial Motte and Bailey castle with a stone keep and living quarters in the enclosure surrounding it. And this was the Greys' home until the 14th century, when they decided to upgrade. Most of the buildings that we've excavated seem to have come into use round about the early 1300s. How is that reflected in the history?
Well, we don't have anyone that we can definitely identify as the builder, but we've got here a William Ferrers who summoned Parliament as Baron of Groby, and he dies in 1325. So this is about the sort of time that you can imagine them going, we've got the name, we've got the position, we're rising in society. What we want is a really nice, big, medieval, you know, style house to kind of back that up, really.
What about when our houses were demolished in the late 1400s, early 1500s? What was going on then?
Well, this comes into the people that I'm really interested in, because Elizabeth Woodville has two boys by John Grey, and one of them is Thomas Grey, and as part of her rise in the royal family, he becomes a marquis. He's given a marquis and he marries an heiress with the title. Maybe he goes, well, I'll start building here again and make this the show house that I want it to be if I'm going to be now a great Tudor magnate, having been a great Plantagenet magnate. So he builds the great brick tower and I think starts work on here.
So he might have demolished all the stuff that we've been excavating then, and that's where we get our brick tower. So perhaps when the Greys' fortunes rose with William Ferrers in the 14th century, they began to build their stunning medieval home with two-storey accommodation, a magnificent great hall and buttressed ranges forming a quadrangle. A property fit for the remarkable Elizabeth Woodville, Queen of England. And later her son, the Marquis Thomas Grey, went one better, demolishing this stone palace and building an even more fashionable brick residence, our 15th century tower. What do we know about the mansion, Jonathan?
Well, we know that it was supposed to look like this, at least just prior to the death of that man, Francis Popham, who was the patron of the estate. But what we don't know is whether it was completed to look like that, whether the artist has used licence, or if it was partially completed and they lived in a couple of rooms in a shell.
Is archaeology going to be able to give us the answers?
Well, I think it will. I think the most important question is, was the house actually over there where that portico is? But what really fascinates me, Tony, is if it was partially completed, what was going on in those rooms? Did you have the families of the builders in there? Were they squatting? And archaeology should be able to tell us.
First things first, we need to confirm that the house is behind the portico. So geophys start to look for the grand eastern facade, depicted here in one of a pair of watercolours. The other shows the north facade, complete with an impressive main entrance. So is that portico there, that bit here?
That's it. This blown-up painting shows it nicely, doesn't it?
How long would this north front have been?
Well, in the 1920s, there's a particularly dry summer, and they recorded that the parch marks on the ground here were 200 feet wide by 120, and took that to be the side walls of the house.
That's 1, 2, 3... This is all looking a bit too easy. The eastern facade should be 100 feet away from the centre of the portico. Have you done the geophys for this area yet?
Of course we have.
And have you hit anything that might be our east wall?
Well, look at these results. The red line is actually that theoretical line at 100 feet. You can see this very clear black line right on the edge of our survey grid.
I tell you why I'm concerned, John. You see, this looks like a perfectly regular rectangular pile, doesn't it? But relative to the portico there, this thing's coming out at a cranky angle.
Yeah, it might just be the effect of the results, but I think the only way is we've got to dig it.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree, because if we can actually pick up something really distinctive like this doorway, then from that we could extrapolate where the front wall and the back wall's going to be.
I mean, the other thing is, there's also this feature in the data. That might just be a ditch. Now, whether that's related to the house or an earlier phase of activity, I think it's worth looking at that as well.
Yeah. So in goes Trench 1 to locate the eastern facade.
Whoa, 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 that looks like a big bit of building, that does. That's the sort of stuff I'd have expected the building to be made of, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Mind your knees.
Manganese?
No, mind your
Manganese. Manganese.
Ah.
Oh.
Here, Francis. Now that looks like that mortar, look. That is that same mortar. That is exactly that same mortar as is over there.
On the portico?
That is. Go on then, John. Where's this on the geophysics?
Oh, well, I said it was.
Yeah, but I thought you said it was right at the end of the track.
No, look, you can see it. 2 metres in.
2 metres in.
2 metres? Oh, well, there you go then.
That's it.
That is it then.
It's still the first hour of the dig, and already it looks like we're onto the eastern facade of Francis Popham's grand mansion, a building project clearly intended to show off the family's status. You know how if you're building your own place and you run out of money, you park a caravan on site and rough it for a few months? Well, this is the Popham's version of that caravan. The lodge that Francis Popham built was up on the hill overlooking the moated medieval mansion, which we believe he demolished to make way for his new house. If there was a perfectly serviceable medieval building here anyway, why do you think Francis Popham spent so much money on building a new place?
Well, the 18th century is a century of improvement, and that's a key word. And people want to improve their estates. They want to prove their taste and their culture. And one of the ways that you do that is by building or rebuilding. And so putting up a new house or refronting an old house was very, very typical.
When did Francis die?
Francis dies in 1779 in February. It's his wife who takes over, and Dorothy Popham's an interesting woman and obviously a fairly forceful woman, and she keeps the building going until 1797 when she dies. Now this is really intriguing because of the fact that she doesn't have a child, and most of these family houses that are being built with dynasty in mind. You want to perpetuate your family name.
And if Francis and Dorothy had no heirs, it makes such a vast building project all the more extraordinary. In 1534, Henry VIII visited this manor house in Buckinghamshire, the first of many visits by the king and his daughter Elizabeth. But the owner knew that the royals expected only the biggest and the best, so he had his home transformed into a palace. But magnificent though this Tudor building is, it's hardly big enough to support the king and his entourage of over 300 courtiers. It must have been at least twice this big. So where's the rest of it? And what exactly does it take to build a house fit for a king? As usual, we've got just 3 days to find out. We've come to Chenies Manor at the invite of Elizabeth MacLeod Matthews, who's lived here since the 1950s. She and her late husband spent decades trying to decipher the house's complex history, with only partial success. And even the famed historian Nicholas Pevsner, who spent 50 years chronicling Britain's architectural heritage, found the building a mystery.
He came in the 60s, and he came and had a leisurely tea and chatted to my husband about it.
What did he think about it?
He did mention, I think, that the brickwork was similar to the brickwork at Eton College, and that it was very, very early brick. And he said that it was a great puzzle.
Well, the country's greatest expert on architecture may have been stumped by this puzzle, but it looks like somebody's been able to solve it. Jonathan?
Tony?
I don't know why we're here. We've got loads of good standing archaeology, we've got lots of documents, and Mick, I've just been looking at the guidebook to Cheney Manor House, and there's even a painting of what this place would have looked like in Tudor times. Who painted it, you ask? Jonathan Foyle.
We didn't burn every copy. Now, you'll see this is a suggested appearance, you know, like TV dinners that never work out that way when you serve them. And it may be the same here, that when we look for the proof behind this speculative vision, that it's much more complex than I've initially suggested. So I want to learn more, that's the point.
Jonathan's serving suggestion, painted from the church tower, is based on the buildings that remain on the site. Namely, this western wing and this southern wing, which we believe were here at the time of Henry's visits, as well as evidence of a medieval manor hall, which would have been the focal point for eating and entertainment. A historical document mentions a wing measuring 9 chambers from the church to a gatehouse. This could either run along the north or the east of the courtyard, with either one containing the grand gatehouse entrance. Jonathan's preferred option is 2 wings with the gatehouse to the east, giving us a palace large enough for a king and his entourage.
We're talking about a house that Henry VIII visited and Elizabeth, up to 1,000 people descending on it for periods up to a couple of weeks or more. It must have been a very big complex with lots of supporting structures. So my neat vision might be much more complex in reality.
Mick, how do we explode Jonathan's cosy vision of what this place would have looked like?
Well, I think we can look, the 2 wings that are on there that don't exist today, we can have a look at those by putting some trenches across and see if there is any walls in the bottom of them. But of course, the building itself is a piece of archaeology, and it's full, just by looking around the outside, of clues of where walls have joined on, windows have been altered. So there's a sort of 3-dimensional jigsaw to sort out of the building itself.
Absolutely, there is, yeah.
I'm going to be really fascinated to see what the difference is at the end of day 3.
You're going to make his life hell, aren't you?
I am. I want to know what the difference is going to be between this painting and what we finally come up with.
Let's get on then.
And so our first trench goes in based on Jonathan's recreation. Here on the proposed eastern wing, close to where he believes there was a grand gatehouse. You're a bit previous, aren't you? We haven't even got the geophys results yet.
Yeah, but I don't think it'll matter, actually. We've got a lot of clues as to what might be going on here. We know about these 2 wings. We can see where that step is there by the fire alarm. And then on the other side, you've got a bit of wall sticking out. Well, that's the 2 bits of wall coming out in this direction.
There's different sorts of brickwork there, aren't there?
There's all sorts of stuff going on. We're going to have to spend a lot of time looking at that, because for now it just tells us something's coming off in this direction.
Join Time Team on Patreon to access exclusive 3D models, masterclasses and behind-the-scenes insights.